Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana May and
Jackie Sanders. We are two art professionals sharing forth the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
we talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday.
So chances are for today's episode, at some point or another, every artist has experienced that nagging feeling of FOMO, which stands for fear of missing out. As it relates to our episode, fear of missing out in the quote unquote art world. As always, the grass often seems greener on the other side, and the art world isn't always as it seems, especially online. So today we're going to be talking about that comparison trap and why it's crucial to focus on your own unique artistic journey.
Yes, and this is definitely something that we personally have both felt. We know many other artists have felt, because especially when it comes to marketing and social media or just the outside looking in, there is that illusion of success that other people have, or that pressure to constantly be producing because so-and-so posts on their social media every day, or the deception, the allure of comparing your journey to someone else's. And that is a huge part of where FOMO, the fear of missing out, comes from, because there's that illusion of success, right? But it isn't always necessarily what it seems like. Sometimes you look at other artists, they're like hitting the jackpot, super productive, always making work, making sales left and right. Their new series is just like flying off the shelves. And you may be saying, oh, well, I don't have that level of success right now. Like, what am I not doing that they clearly are doing? When it's really important to remember that the appearance of success doesn't necessarily mean that, one, they are successful behind the scenes, so to speak, but also it doesn't account for those struggles, those experiments that didn't work, all the time that even if they are hopefully having the success that they're projecting, it doesn't account for the many weeks or months that it took them to get there, when they weren't sharing necessarily the hard work, the troubles that happened behind the scenes. Especially when it comes to social media, I think that's a big place where this comes into play. People posting their highlight reels, they don't necessarily post about the exhibitions they didn't get into. We only post the exhibitions we are in, right? You don't talk about, okay, I was rejected from 6 different shows and accepted to one. You just post about the one that you were accepted in. So having that highlight reel from one artist to another, it's not necessarily out of like malicious intent. And I think oftentimes we feel like we're just sharing wins along our journey, because we experience the downs, we experience the times of struggle. So it feels authentic to us, but from the outside looking in, it's still that fear of missing out that we may accidentally be sharing with other artists.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's one of those things where it's like, there's already so many bad news out in the world, so to speak. And as artists, a lot of times we want to, share the positive and the optimistic outlook. So it's like, it's not about like hiding necessarily the bad stuff, but it's also like you don't really want to highlight the bad stuff either. Why? Like you're there to show as your best self, living your best life. Not everything's like rose-colored glasses things, but like, there's the positive side. So it's important to remember when looking at somebody else's super positive stuff, not to get that little sting. Oh, it's perfect for them, because when we're posting, we're doing the same thing. We're showing like the best stuff. So it's fine. And that's where it's like essential to remember when feeling starts like coming up. I feel a bit almost like little butterflies in your stomach where you're like, ooh, but I wish, fill in the blank. I think that's when it's most important to remember to celebrate your own progress rather than comparing to somebody else's perceived success. Like Jackie mentioned, you don't know what those ups and downs look like behind the scenes. And honestly, like in terms of comparison data, the only real full data you have is your own. Just compare it to yourself. Also, the true value of your own art definitely goes beyond that immediate commercial or perceived commercial success. It actually has to do with your artistic voice and your progression over time. So, a much better comparison is to look at what your artwork looked like, say, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, whatever that is, as opposed to trying to, oh, but mine's not as good as fill in the blanks are, or I don't sell as much as fill in the blank. Because that's just, yeah, that's not apples to apples.
Yeah, I think especially that's important to remember too, like as we're going into the new year, maybe starting to reevaluate some things in our creative practice, in our art business, work-life balance, all these parts that make our creative career. And one thing that we talk about all the time, especially on our episodes where we have guests, is like, how do you define success? And I think that oftentimes can be a place that can help your mindset shift in terms of going back to why are you making art? How do you define success? Because it's different for everyone. And so if sales are not necessarily your main focus, but you still get FOMO from an artist who's selling a lot, like you're comparing yourself to a goal that you maybe aren't focused on. And I think that's a key point of it, of acknowledging the other types of wins from success standpoint. To your point, Adriana, of your creative development, how your work has evolved, and what those milestones that you've set, that you've hit. Just celebrate those wins, because that's part of it too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then another thing that tends to pop up in regards to FOMO for artists, it's the illusion of the 10 overnight 10-year success, as the joke goes, or as the myth goes, if you will. So you'll have someone that looks like they suddenly exploded on social media or on the internet or on magazines, whatever it is. Like suddenly you're just seeing them a lot and they seem to be everywhere and they seem to be doing great. And the thing is, when you kind of dig in a little bit deeper, a lot of times these artists that seem to skyrocket into fame seemingly out of nowhere, behind the scenes, there's a history of perseverance, dedication, learning from
Mhm.
failures. Like success 99.99999% of the time is gradual. It's not overnight. It's very rare. And even when, even in media, you have like an artist, say it's like a singer, and they seem to explode out of nowhere. They've usually been doing it a long time. They've had, maybe videos on YouTube for a long time, and finally somebody discovered them. But they didn't explode from like what they did yesterday. The thing that's skyrocketing them to fame is the thing already been doing for a long time. So a lot of times that over quote unquote overnight, um, and the way like, our society works, it's like it looks like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I want to be discovered. So there's artists, actually, there's surveys that have been done, for young people where they ask them like, what do they want to be when they grow up? And even artists will say something similar-ish to this. And they just want to be like YouTube famous or TikTok famous or things like that.
Mhm.
Like they just want to be discovered. And the reality of it is like, no, that's almost akin to the whole like, you want to be a famous artist, but only work out of your basement because you don't want to do the other legwork. And it's like, it just really doesn't work that way. So when you think about it for this overnight success type myth, it's like, it's a journey towards artistic success that involves learning from failures. You have to fail. You have to fail forward. And then embracing that continuous growth, keep doing what you're doing, and then eventually, and depending what your goals are, and if you're working in alignment with those goals, then you may find that, maybe someday you will be that person that other artists are going, oh my gosh, they blew up overnight. But chances are, no, you've been at it for a while.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's especially when thinking about your creative artistic development, it's really easy to say, oh, well, I wish I was here in my creative growth. I wish I was there. But it really is that annoying saying of like, time just takes time. And I think, especially when you try to put pressure on your creative process, your creative growth, that also then like hinders your progress, right? When you say, oh, I have to be at this stage by this date. Some people thrive on those deadlines, but that can be also really crippling for some people. And when it comes to finding your voice, finding your like artistic development, it's just about making more work, allowing time to happen for your work to evolve, and just being patient with it, which is a very frustrating part of it, because that pressure for quick success is really that element that hinders your creative process. Because also, when kind of either comparing yourself to other artists or even yourself to what you want your goals to be, I think it's also really important to bring up the idea of what makes sense for you at this phase of life that you're in, because a creative practice does not exist in a silo, right? Like, we as artists are all full people with personal commitments and a creative practice. So with the workload that you have and your life commitments, do your goals make sense? Maybe you wish you had created more work, but does that align with the current stage of life that you're in, whether personal commitments of taking care of a family, maybe you're taking care of a loved one, other organizations that you volunteer at, nonprofits you're a part of, and really making sure that it's that delicate dance between your artistic ambitions, but also the reality of life outside of your art. Maybe you are juggling a full-time day job with your full-time creative practice right now, to where it doesn't necessarily make the most sense in your schedule to say, well, I'm going to paint for 8 hours every single day on top of a day job where you're working 8 to 9 hours a day, right? Like, that just mathematically is not very sustainable. So you have to consider those outside of your creative practice commitments as factors that will influence your artistic journey, and have realistic expectations that are sustainable for your creativity, as well as align with, okay, during this phase, this is what's realistic for me right now. May not be like that forever. Maybe in the future, you'll have more time or less time, and those goals will shift. But I think trying to make goals in a silo for your creative practice is just setting yourself up for a really difficult struggle of and potentially increasing FOMO, because you have to be realistic with where you are, what's manageable and sustainable, which is one thing we always talk about for where you are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just reminded me of like, I've met so many artists that have either babies or small children, and they're like, I just don't have a lot of time. And we've even had some on the podcast where, it's like, it doesn't mean you're not an artist just because you're not doing as much. Your
Mhm.
artistic growth is not directly correlated with like bulk quantity of work that you're produced. Yes, you do need volume to evolve and work through things, but the highest or the most important thing is actually the quality, not the sheer volume of things you're creating anyways. So it's like that delicate balance of like, sure, maybe from a, purely mathematical, you know, number of pieces you're creating, you may not have to create as or have the chance to create as many right now, but that doesn't mean you're not evolving. It just may mean it's a little bit slower than what you want, but that's okay. It's like stages of life, things change.
Mhm.
You may be able to have a little bit more time later on, or maybe your full time can turn into a part time in the near future. Then you'll have a little extra time to, to continue towards that growth. So, with all of this, obviously, balance is key, which you've heard us harp about all the time. You have to find that harmony between those artistic pursuits and goals that you have and your personal life. Because also, two things. You want to avoid burnout, but then the other thing I'm thinking about is like you also want to avoid like alienation. Like if you're so focused on like, no, I have to make, these 50 pieces by the end of the month type thing, whatever that goal looks like to you. There may be other persons in your life, friends and family, that you're kind of setting aside maybe a little too much. And they're not understanding like what's this pressure, like where this is coming from, and especially if it's FOMO, if it's this external pressure, this it's not even coming from you. It's coming from, a perception of what you see online of how many pieces you should be producing, then you're going to be pushing people away. And when that burnout hits, your support system, which is so, so important, they may not be there for you. So definitely you have to balance the artistic side and you have to balance the personal side of things. for sure. But next up, we're going to be talking about some of our strategies when, when FOMO shows up and how we navigate that. First, let's put a quick word from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by the Level Up Artists business community. This ever-evolving membership values community over competition and growing connections with fellow creatives who share the same goals and challenges as you.
Life as a modern artist can be both exciting and overwhelming. Art school or self-taught, emerging or seasoned professional, there's a lot of information out there, but what do working artists actually need?
Other industries have continuing education programs for their professionals to sharpen up their skills and stay up to date with the systems, technology, and tools needed to succeed. And we believe that artists should too.
We've spent countless hours of trial and error weeding through tons of information to find the gold and creating sustainable systems that actually work so you don't have to waste your time going down endless rabbit holes.
We are passionate about exchanging ideas and sharing resources with fellow career-minded artists about the business side of art. From artist documents and exhibition prep to templates and tools to help you work faster and smarter, our course modules cover everything from social media to technology and sustainable studio practices too.
Ready to get started? Head on over to levelupartisthub.com to learn more, get immediate access, and level up your creative career today. Welcome back, everybody. So we want to share with you some of the strategies we use to keep focus, especially when FOMO shows up. And I think one of the first things is to acknowledge that it exists. This is normal. It pops up for everybody every once in a while. Just don't let it control your artistic journey. Once you recognize it's there, try to dive your attention back onto your individual growth rather than comparing it to others. You're scrolling through social media, you see somebody else's wins, you feel that sting, recognize the sting, move through it and move past it, essentially. That's when have you have to shift that narrative from also that competition feeling, which maybe where some of this is coming from, and just remember collaboration in the art community is a lot more important. So instead of being like, ooh, I wish, two things, number one, celebrate the success of your fellow artists. It doesn't have to diminish your own progress. Saying congratulations on getting into that show does not make you any less of a successful artist. On the other hand, it strengthens relationships and truly be happy for them. Like, this is awesome. Plus, it can also lead to, oh, this is something that maybe I could do in the future. Like, it's a good thing. And if you didn't get in and they got in, I know it stings a little bit, maybe next year, maybe the next time. So that's okay. And then try to redirect that feeling of missing out into a positive force. Again, use that to maybe fuel you or give you energy to explore a new creative avenue. So maybe it is that show that somebody else got into and you didn't. That's okay. Maybe it wasn't the show for you. Maybe your work wasn't the right fit for that show and it has nothing to do with the quality of your work. Okay, then maybe I'm going to use that energy that just surged in to look for shows that are a better fit for my artwork, or where the jurors are maybe a little bit more in alignment or like the kind of work that I do. Like, that's okay. But don't let it fester. Don't let it stay there and marinate and turn into, molehill to mountain situation.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that is one thing that I haven't had to implement this suggestion, but I heard someone say it a few years ago, and it was kind of a refreshing look on it, to where if there truly is maybe someone that you follow on social media where you're like, I know in theory, best practice, like I should just be genuinely happy for them, right? Like community over competition, celebrate their wins, of course, always. But if you are maybe in a headspace where you feel like you truly can't do that, and every time you see a post on social media where they pop up, your confidence just immediately tanks, or you feel that festering, like, I also don't want people to feel like they have to ignore that. Maybe that's something that they need to work through. However, you can remove them from your social media feed. Like, if it's affecting you that much, either unfollow them, because people don't know if you follow or unfollow them, or simply hide them from your feed. I know, especially for Instagram, that's a feature you can do on the page where you're not unfollowing them, but you can hide them from your feed so that they don't pop up if you're scrolling, let's say. So that's also an element of personal honesty that you have to have with yourself of like, why do I get triggered maybe by this person sharing their wins? Of course, maybe you can get to a place then where you can have them in your feed again and celebrate for them, but also give yourself permission if it's at a detriment to your personal creative growth, just hide them from your feed. Like, honestly,
Hmm.
they won't know, and it'll just be better for everyone involved. So, this is your
Hmm.
official permission to do so, because
Yep.
ultimately the goal is to focus on your personal growth. Your journey is uniquely yours. It is not a competition, even if there are moments where it may feel like it is, because you want to make sure that you're setting goals based on your pace and allowing room for experimentation, creative exploration. And as we talked about before the commercial, that looks different for everyone. Some people may be able to say, I'm painting for 6 to 8 hours a day. So their creative exploration is going to happen a lot quicker than, let's say, if you have two 30-minute blocks during the work week, right? Like that will just take time. But you have to be realistic with your own expectations of yourself given all of your life commitments. And ultimately, one of the biggest like game changers for many artists is finding that supportive community, and not just finding it, but building it for yourself, of other creatives where you genuinely are happy for their wins. You're celebrating each other's successes. You can confide in them if you have questions, because it's really crucial to have that, especially with other creatives, because they understand the struggles of the creative process that quote unquote non-creatives, which is a larger conversation, but maybe you have a supportive partner or other friends that they don't have an active creative practice. So they may be able to be a good listening ear and supportive and have great intentions, but they don't necessarily get it, right? Like other artists, if you have maybe a tough market, if you are struggling in that confidence, then they understand that. You can lean on them for support. You can also celebrate victories together, share experiences, what you've learned, and really have that community as part of your individual journey to really celebrate those wins, provide valuable insight and encouragement to where if you're feeling down, they can say, well, hold on, let's remember back to where you were 6 months ago. Look at all of these things that you've done since then. And they can provide that context in the pep talk of wins that are huge that other people may not be able to see, or you may not be able to see in that moment. And also potential elements of collaboration. Collectively, that can strengthen your body of work, whether you make a series together, whether it's just insight on, oh, what are the local galleries here that my work would be good fit at? Should I apply to this show or should I apply to that show? Really having that mutual goals together, but slightly different skill sets can be super powerful for you moving forward, as well as helping other artists move forward too.
Yeah, yeah. And it can definitely help when you're like, why did this sting so much? Maybe you just talk to other artists who maybe didn't get into that same show that you didn't. And it's like, oh, well, it looks like this exhibition was mostly figurative and we're abstract. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it wasn't personal, and that's okay. But no, being able to share your artistic journey, and being vulnerable can foster deeper connections with your community. You just let it all out. And again, like Jackie said, especially as opposed to non-artists who may not understand what you're going through. Artists tend to, your artist friends and your community tends to understand a little bit better where you're coming from and could have actionable advice on what to do moving forward, especially if they've gone exactly through the same thing you're going, that is triggering the FOMO in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing to think about it is that in that collaborative environment, FOMO can transform into an opportunity for shared success. So suddenly you're going, okay, so you didn't get in, I didn't get in, you didn't get in, and we're all feeling the little bits of a sting. Okay, how about we work together on finding something where the three of us do fit? Or maybe we're going to put together a proposal for a space and actually do a group exhibition. Like, let's turn lemonades, baby. Let's turn this around. So that's the other part that I like about like, reaching out. And I would have like a little drop of caution with this one. you know, when the FOMO pops up, and you're in a community, there's a dark side to this. This is not to have a pity party. This is not to have a whining party. That's not the idea at all. Like, lean on your community for support, but it's not for amplifying the how dare they not let me in. Like, that's not helpful at all. It can come up. So be cautious of the group that you select to vent and or, share this feedback with, this FOMO with, because it's like social media. It can be very positive, but sometimes you go down the very negative rabbit hole, Facebook, and it just continues to amplify. So, anyways, just a little word of caution. But as we wrap this one up, some final takeaways. I would say I think the biggest thing when FOMO pops up is to always, always, always remember that idea that that journey is absolutely unique to yours. It comes with its own set of challenges and triumphs. This is not a how do I become a lawyer? Well, I do this and then I go here and then or a doctor and then I do this and then like literally the artist journey, part of what makes it so wonderful and sometimes a little bit, challenging is that there is no exact blueprint that you can follow. It's so liberating. It's your own. So when that FOMO comes up, it just means like your journey, your path, maybe you've done some things a little bit different than that person. And it's time to evaluate, whether it's in alignment with what you want to do or not, but your path is yours, it's never apples to apples. And then the other thing um it's not about being the best. This is not a competition. It's not a I want to sell more than they sell. I mean, if you want to make that your goal, great. Then do basically plan out what you need to in order to accomplish that goal, but do it your own way. But
Mm-hmm.
honestly, it's not a competition. This is about being the best version of yourself. It's always about your own iteration of fill in the blank and doing your best at it. And if it falls short, then you try and try again, and you just continue improving over time.
Exactly. And really, fighting FOMO is an ongoing process, right? Like, all you can really focus on is your own personal growth, celebrating your unique creative voice that you're sharing with the world, and only comparing your current self to your past self, because that's really the only measurable way of seeing your own personal progress.
Absolutely. Well, with that, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for being here with us on today's conversation.
As always, our blog will be linked in today's show notes. We will find episode notes and links to our other podcast episodes.
If you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share your feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can reach us through social media. I'm at May Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio across all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we're at Level Up Artists on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.